Okay. Okay, big hand is on the 12, which means it is 6 o'clock, and it's time to call to order our regular meeting of the Whitefish Community Development Board for March 21st, 2024. Bree, we get a roll call, please? We don't do roll call anymore, okay. Looks like everybody's present except for John Middleton, who is excused. And we will get started with agenda changes. Anybody want to change the order on the agenda? It's all the same, basically all the same project. And so tonight, for everyone's information, we are going to combine the presentation for all three of the agenda items into one presentation and then one public comment period. And then we'll take separate motions from the board and approve each item separately. But it'll all be one comment period. And if something comes up, then we can reopen the public hearing, but I'm not anticipating that. Since it's all basically the same project, we'll do it all at the same time. And then the next item on our agenda is the approval of the February 15th minutes. Can I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion. We approve the minutes as presented in the draft from the staff.
Second.
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Any comments or changes? Okay, those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, nay. Okay, it passes unanimously. The next item on the agenda is communications from the public for items not on the agenda. Is anybody here to speak on anything that is not on the agenda this evening? Okay, seeing none, we will move on to unfinished business. There is none. And with that, we will get to our public hearing. We have 3 public hearings scheduled, but they are all essentially the same project. So Wendy is going to present on all 3 of these, and then we will hold our public hearing. Take it away, Wendy.
Okay, for some reason, the computer is not allowing me to open the PowerPoint presentation, so I apologize. I don't know why it's not working, but I thought maybe some maps might be helpful as we go through this discussion. So again, this is one project, but there are 3 separate requests. There is a growth policy amendment, a zone change, and then a preliminary plat. So we'll start with the growth policy map amendment. So the applicant is proposing to amend the 2007 growth policy from rural residential to urban. The property is 34.06 acres and it's unaddressed on Flathead Avenue, kind of across the street from the fire station. And the growth policy map amendment is to facilitate both the rezone and the preliminary plat. In addition, this property is on the agenda for the council to annex on April 1st, so it's currently in the county. The property is surrounded by residential uses. The city shop is to the south, and then there's the emergency services building and professional offices and some industrial to the east. Again, it's currently rural residential, as a lot of kind of the Caro Avenue area has a rural residential designation. And they are proposing urban, which would be similar to the neighborhood to the kind of northwest, or northeast there, sorry. The property is served by all public services and facilities. I think I'm going to wait on the public comment until we get through all of these, so I'll address them all together. The growth policy is intended to provide guidance. You know, as you were getting the update from Alan, you know that we have visions and goals and policies in kind of a general and comprehensive manner. It is not a regulatory document, it is guidance. It was approved by the council back in 2007, so we've reviewed this amendment according to the, in the context of the overall goals and policies in that plan. The plan does have a couple of implementation items under Chapter 7 that if someone wants to amend a plan, these are kind of the things that we're looking at. Those items are errors. There are some errors that we found in the plan. Community conditions have changed, and there's some clear and extraordinary benefit in terms of achieving community goals that warrant the amendment. So under errors, again, it's got a rural residential land use designation. However, the zoning underneath it does not comport with that land use designation. Rural residential is like 2.5 acres to, I think, 10 acres, where the county zoning on the western half is their R3, which is comparable to our WR1, which is a 1/4 acre lot. And then the property on the eastern side is the county I2, which is their heavy industrial. So it's intended to be residential, not the low-density rural. So there is an error, we would say, in that mapping. Community conditions have changed that warrant an amendment. So the affordable housing has long been an issue for the community, and while this project isn't providing any affordable housing, they are adding to the overall supply of housing with their proposal, which may have an effect of reducing some housing costs. Of course, only deed-restricted housing, as you know, truly keeps housing affordable in perpetuity. Under clear and extraordinary community benefits and achieving goals or resolving issues, the city has long had policies and goals for east-west transportation. You know, we're a lot of north-south roads, but we don't have a lot of east, which causes everyone to funnel onto just a couple of different streets. The extension of West 18th, which is what they're proposing in their preliminary plat, has long been in many transportation plans as a possible connection between Baker Avenue and Caro Avenue. And by them upgrading and proposing that roadway, that does improve some transportation circulation. It has been a long-time goal. And then also the heavy industrial zoning, just south of the O'Brien Bluffs, is really just not complementary. It's pretty incompatible with single-family residential. I have a copy of the zoning district. If you want to hear some of the uses, they're pretty heavy industrial. They're not really what you'd want to see next to your single-family home. So it's residential is, you know, far more compatible type of use. Some of the other items to consider with the growth policy, how the proposed change will promote the goals and objectives of the growth policy. The proposed change is compatible with the existing neighborhood and is appropriate. I've listed some of those goals where it's implementing the growth policy. Again, the zoning and a more residential type of use is more compatible with those neighbors than the industrial type of zoning that's currently there. And it is on the edge of the urbanizing city limits. There's, you know, public services and facilities, and it does make more sense to have more of an urban land use designation next to public facilities versus more of a rural designation. So we are recommending approval of that. The next.
Can I just stop you there for a
Yeah,
second? 'Cause
for sure.
I'm a little confused about the underlying county zoning at this point, because it just shows one big block, but this is several lots, it's not just one
No,
lot,
it
right?
is one lot. Actually, that map shows it probably a little bit better. I think maybe it was 2 lots at some point. You know, looking at some older maps, it looks like maybe it was 2 lots at some point with
Okay.
2 different zoning districts, and then they merged the lots at some point.
So what is the underlying county zoning
So
right
if
now?
you, on that map right there, you'll see that on the left-hand side, which is the west, is R3, which is comparable to our WR1, 10,000 square foot lots.
Okay, and
And
the
then
right,
on the east side is the I2,
okay.
which is the county's heavy industrial zone.
And on our land use designation in our last growth policy, what is the underlying zoning there? Or what
Well,
what
it's
is
in
it
the county.
identified? Okay.
It's in the county, so it doesn't have any city zoning.
So, but it doesn't have, but in our growth policy map from. the
Right. So on the left-hand side there, you'll see it's rural residential,
Okay,
which is very similar to what kind of the entire Caro, like kind of the north half of Caro has that same land use designation,
okay,
up to 7th.
all right.
And they're proposing urban.
So the growth policy says rural residential, but the underlying zoning is different.
The underlying
different.
zoning, yeah, is
That's
an
already
urban
there.
designation and an industrial
Okay,
designation.
all right, thank you.
So then the second request, if the growth policy map amendment to urban is successful, the applicant is interested in rezoning to WR1, which again on the west side is complementary to that same zoning. And then changing the east side to WR2, which is the same zoning as the O'Brien Bluffs neighborhood to the north. And then the WR2, of course, has way different development standards and uses than the industrial zoning designation, where the WR1 and the R3, the county's R3, they're very similar to each other. So the urban land use designation, which is what they're proposing, is complementary to WLR, WR1, and WR2. We review zone changes according to the criteria in the regulations, which it's made in accordance with the growth policy. So with an urban land use designation, these zoning districts would be appropriate. The property is served by Whitefish Police and Fire, and any future development is required to meet the fire department standards. Under promoting public health, public safety, and general welfare, public services and utilities are available and will be extended to the property. City water and sewer are available in Flathead Avenue, and so they can be extended throughout the property. It is also within the city's extension of services plan, so it's intended to be connected to city services and available. Under providing reasonable, adequate light and air, the zoning designation does include setbacks, building height, lot coverage, and all those good things with zoning, and will be required to conform with the building code. Under effect on motorized and non-motorized, the preliminary plat has a TIS, so we'll talk about that here in a second. And all the streets will be paved and publicly owned and maintained. Compatible with the urban growth. Again, the WR1 and the WR2 are compatible with the urban land use designation. And the character of the district is a combination of single-family residential and large acreage, more towards the west, and then more urban kind of to the north. So it is a complementary zoning and uses to those neighbors, and it is a bit of a transition to the more rural area further to the west. The property is undeveloped, and the WR1 and R2 permit residential uses. So the surrounding buildings should not be negatively impacted by the proposed zone change. Changing it to WR1 and R2 would encourage the most appropriate use of the land with the urban land use designation. And then the property is going from undeveloped, but is in an area with some urban sized lots with access to public services and facilities. So we are recommending approval of the zoning map change. Do you have any questions for me on the zone change?
Any questions on the zone change?
I have one.
Go ahead.
So you said that on April 1st, this is due to be annexed.
Correct.
The applicant asked for that, and so the city will basically say yes on April 1st?
Right.
Okay, just making sure.
Yeah, that was part of the packet of information, was the annexation
Got it.
request.
Thank you.
Ready? Move on? Okay. This one's a little harder to see, but you do have this in your packet. So the final request is preliminary plat. This is a 77 lot subdivision. There's 59 single family detached homes and 18 sublot townhomes for 9 actual structures. Again, still on 34 acres. It's 2.26 dwelling units per acre. The property will be accessed off of Flathead Avenue. There's 2 connections there, which I think will end up being probably the primary entrances to the neighborhood. They are proposing to extend another connection off of an extension of West 18th Street along the south, and 1 connection off of Sawtooth Drive at the north kind of central part where that little thing juts up. The one on Sawtooth, they'll have a 30-foot dedicated right-of-way. Oh, sorry. The West 18th Street will include a 30-foot dedicated right-of-way along their portion of the property, and then on the city shop property, that will be a 30-foot dedicated right-of-way. The 18 townhomes or townhome sublots, so 9 two-family townhome structures, are proposed along the south edge of the property, adjacent to the shop, and then the remaining lots are single-family detached, ranging in size from just over 10,000 square foot to a little over 24,000 square foot lots. The parkland requirements is being met with about a 10.5 acre park that bisects the property from the south of the property line all the way up through the north, and it's on the western half of the property. That parkland contains a critical area stormwater conveyance and some associated wetlands with it. They are not asking for any subdivision variances, and again, the property is going to be annexed on April 1st. Again, the property is surrounded by residential type uses, the city shop, the emergency services, and some professional offices. Public services and facilities are located, and we did notice the adjacent landowners within 300 feet of the project. We did a kind of combined notice with the zone change, the growth policy, and the preliminary plat. That happened the end of February. We noticed advisory agencies put a legal in the paper, put the project on the website, posted a sign on the property, and we did receive a number of comments which are in your packet. We also received an additional comment just yesterday, and that I set that one up there as well as put it online. Folks are concerned about traffic, impact to public services, buffering, the use of the public right-of-way into O'Brien Bluffs, changes to the neighborhood character, loss of wildlife and habitat, lack of providing housing for moderate incomes, and encouraging the applicant to pursue affordable housing within the project. We reviewed it according to the zoning and subdivision regulations and state law. The fire marshal has reviewed the project for conformance. They'll be putting in hydrants. The streets will be looped. They're 60-foot right-of-way, and so there will be access throughout the entire development for emergency services. The property is located within the city's fire district, and it is heavily wooded. There's a lot of trees on this property. Many of the trees and existing vegetation, of course, will be removed for streets and then cleared for infrastructure and building sites. We have recommended a condition of approval for a tree preservation plan to identify trees that will be saved during construction. We ask that open spaces be properly mitigated for wildland fire protection and maintained yearly. And we're going to recommend a condition of approval that a vegetative management plan be developed for the subdivision in compliance with our regulations, and that would be reviewed by the fire marshal. Access will be onto the newly constructed streets. Nobody will be fronting on Flathead Avenue or West 18th. Everything will be internally accessed. A traffic impact study was completed because it had more than 200 vehicle trips. 45% of the trips will travel north on Baker and 35% will travel south. The TIS noted the intersection at 13th and Baker has long been identified as having some level of service challenges. And along with the growth, just regular traffic growth and this project, the intersection will have a level of service F in the PM peak and a level of service E in the AM peak. It will account for 2 to 3% of the total volumes at build out at that intersection. And the TIS encouraged the developer to work with the city to ensure planning improvements are done and implemented to help maintain the flow. The TIS also notes that Flathead Avenue will be improved and 18th Street will be reconstructed from the property out to Baker Avenue, and then 18th Street will be improved along the southern property line. Between the Flathead Avenue and the western edge of the project, so it could be connected to the west in the future. And again, 18th Street has been long planned for a potential area for an east-west connector between Baker and Caro Avenue. 18th West from Flathead Avenue out to Baker is very narrow. There's probably no room to put a sidewalk or a path. It is like an alley width right now. And so the applicant will need to coordinate their improvements with the Public Works Director. There's no mapped crucial wildlife habitat. However, it's very, very likely that deer, bears, animals move through that wooded piece of property. Preserving the mature trees and that 10.5 acre open space with the stormwater conveyance is going to help maintain some of these patterns. We did notify Fish, Wildlife, and Parks and didn't receive any comments. There is again, the stormwater conveyance, that drains probably runoff and significant rain events. It's a perennial stream, but it's not an area of high groundwater. So it is part of our MAP stormwater conveyances that we did back in 2008, 09. The regulations require a 15-foot setback just to ensure that development doesn't interfere with those flows. And they are gonna put a couple of roads across it, which is fine. They just have to make sure that they don't reduce conveyance capacity, and so that'll be reviewed at the time of engineering plans. The applicant has identified a wetland within the stormwater conveyance. The entire wetland is 1.34 acres. It bisects the property north-south, runs along where the conveyance is. The drainage is connected to the Whitefish River, which confirms our maps that we had, so we agree with that. For wetlands, there's a 100-foot buffer plus a 20-foot setback. The applicant has taken advantage of the buffer averaging, which allows them to squish in the buffers in some areas and make them wide in other areas, just provided that the overall buffer acreage is the same and they're no less than 50 feet. They'll likely be filling in portions of this wetland in order to construct the public roads, and so we'll recommend a condition of approval to review both the final buffer averaging standards and any mitigation for any wetland disturbances. And the wetland area, along with the stormwater conveyance, are located in the park area, so which exceeds our standards. The stormwater is being directed towards storm ponds that are located in that parkland area, one in the north and one in the south, and then the final engineering calculations will happen after approval. Again, streets, so along the north end, a new half street will be connected to Sawtooth Drive. When O'Brien Bluffs was developed in 2007, a right-of-way extension to the west was created in order to facilitate east-west connections. So the applicant is going to do 30 feet on their property, and at some point when the north side develops, that will be completed. So they'll work with the Public Works Director to come up with the design for that. There's a westerly road that goes right up against the property line that could potentially provide further access to the west if and when that property ever develops. The full extension of West 18th is proposed, again, from Flathead Avenue all the way to the western property line. And then we need 30 feet of right-of-way on this project, and then the city shop will have 30 feet on their side. When the city connected Flathead Avenue in front of the emergency services, no frontage improvements were installed. It was just a road to connect up to the shop. And so this project will extend frontage improvements along Flathead Avenue, which would include curb, gutters, sidewalks, street trees, street lights. And I think that's about it for that one. So in the subdivision regulations, we do require parkland dedication. Based on the percentage required for the subdivision, they need to dedicate 1.99 acres, and what they're proposing is 10.43 acres, so quite a bit more than what the requirement is. They're also proposing to install a pathway along this corridor. This park will be left in its natural state. It'll just be a wetland buffer and a stormwater conveyance. The open space will be maintained by the homeowners association, but the trail will be open to the public. And the Parks Department is supportive of this proposal, provided the public access to the future trail is maintained. And so we've included that as a recommended condition of approval. So we are recommending approval of the project subject to 19 conditions of approval. Just to hit some of the highlights of some of the non-standard conditions, we are asking for a tree preservation plan. We'd like to see trees not be removed from the individual lots while infrastructure is being installed. There's quite a number of street improvements that need to happen with this project, including Flathead Avenue frontage improvements, a connection to Sawtooth Drive, West 18th Street from Baker all the way to the western edge of the property, and we're asking them to work with the Public Works Director on the final design of all those roads. We're asking for a 30-foot dedicated right-of-way along the southern edge of this project. We need a final wetland report detailing the buffer averaging and any impacts to the wetland along with a mitigation plan. The trail, which must be open to the public, would be installed along the entire length of the open space. And that plan needs to be approved by the city, including the Parks Department, and needs to facilitate future connections. So there is a drainage that runs along this whole part of town, and it'd be pretty cool to have a trail all along that. Use of garage for townhomes is not permitted, and that's about it. And I also have a aerial too, if that's helpful, to kind of orient yourselves. Any questions for me?
Okay, let's have some questions for Wendy. Nobody? Okay. I have a couple, that just want to clarify a couple things that I heard and that I read. So they would be improving Flathead Avenue, 18th Street, all the way from Baker to the west edge of their property into a regular city street.
Yeah, and the challenge for from Flathead Avenue down to Baker is it is very narrow. It is how wide? 30? It's a 30-foot right-of-way. So our standard right-of-way is 60 feet. So there's enough room to have a road, but there may not be room to have sidewalk or a trail or, non-motorized improvements.
Okay, and is that hill in there, is that too steep is the grade okay on that? That's a pretty steep hill in there.
Yeah, well, the grade on 18th Street won't meet city standards, but there'll be some excavation to try and improve the site angles so it becomes safer at least.
Okay, but they don't have to improve it beyond a 30-foot right-of-way?
Right, correct.
And, okay, we can't require any more right-of-way on their portion of the street where there's gonna be more residential
Well,
use?
along the south part of their project, that will be 60 feet. This is off-site, it's to the east.
Okay,
Yeah, so that it is what it is.
all right, and the city can't give up any more space on our property to make a
It's to
better
the
road?
east, it doesn't have city property on either side.
Yeah, so the area directly adjacent to, or 18th Street directly adjacent to this project to the south
Yeah.
will be 60 feet when it's eventually constructed. We're talking about the area from Flathead Avenue east down to Baker, which is where the hill is that you just
Right.
mentioned.
Yeah.
That area, we only have 30 feet of right-of-way, and the developer doesn't own any property to dedicate.
Okay, and the shop is on the south side of 18th Street, across from the property?
Yep.
Correct.
Okay, all right, that's where I was confused. Okay, thank you. And then just another street issue. So, they're gonna tie into Flathead Avenue and improve that whole section. That's part of the deal there. And then I'm a little confused about the connection to O'Brien Bluffs through, or Sawtooth Avenue or Drive or whatever it's called.
So back in 2007, when they did this loop subdivision, there was one area, it looks like it's a vacant lot, but it's a public right-of-way. And it was located kind of right along a property line for the properties to the west. So it's sort of half on one side and half on the other side, knowing that at some point in the future, potentially there could be a connection.
Okay.
So on this side's property, this project, they only have to dedicate 30 feet, and that's what they're gonna improve into the O'Brien Bluffs subdivision.
Okay, and they're gonna improve that part to connect to Sawtooth?
Correct.
Okay, all right. And then Parkland, would this be a dedicated city park or just? Okay,
No, they're proposing for it to be a homeowners association park, and
Okay.
the Parks Department was okay with it,
okay, so. we're not-
provided there's still public access on a trail that goes through the development, or through the parkland.
Okay, so it's gonna have public access, but but the park will be maintained by the.
The homeowners association.
Okay, that was my question there. Okay. And there is no designated affordable housing in this project at all?
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for Wendy?
They have a lot 61, which seems to be sort of at the end of a very long driveway. What, is that a lot? Are they planning on putting a house back there?
Yeah, yep.
And just the long driveway's okay, and, okay, I was just curious, it seemed sort of odd, but, that's all.
But when you look at the topography, you know, there's kind of where there's some wetland buffer and
Yeah.
area there is kind of just a last little buildable area
Yeah,
that's upland.
right. My only other question was the path or the Mully Trail over to the Sawtooth Drive, they don't have to put that through, so that means that that vacant lot there in the Sawtooth or O'Brien residential, it'll just be a vacant lot. It won't be a road that,
No, that's a public right-of-way.
well, it's a public right-of-way, but it's not paved, is it?
Right, so they'll improve it to connect to Sawtooth
Oh,
for
the-
two-way travel and a sidewalk likely.
Oh, okay, yeah, because it looked to me like it just, their road would go right over to the edge of the O'Brien and then stop.
No, that's a public right-of-way and
Oh, so
they'll connect it all the way
They'll put it
through.
through, so it's a road that you can actually drive over.
Right, yep.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Do you have anything? I did have, oh, go ahead, John.
I'm John Heberly, and I have there we go. I have a potential conflict of interest. I don't think it is a conflict of interest. I own a house in O'Brien Bluffs subdivision, which abuts this proposed new subdivision. And so I guess the question is whether I would suffer a financial loss or even gain by having the new subdivision next door. I don't think having a house in one subdivision next to another subdivision is going to affect my property values one way or the other. So I don't think I have a conflict, but I thought it best to disclose this.
Wendy, do you have any insight on that? Dave? I don't personally think it's a conflict. I think it's okay that you comment and you vote, so we'll go with that. And our decision's not binding anyway. It will go to the city
Right.
council as well.
Exactly.
So, you're not part of the development team, so you're not gonna financially benefit from this or lose from this. The last question I had, so I'm a little concerned about the timing, that we're approving a parcel of property that's not currently we're approving a zone change on a property that's not in the city yet.
Right, so this is how we scheduled it out, was to have it go to you, again, your recommending body, and then it'll get annexed on the 1st, and then on the 15th, this will go to city council. So it'll be in the city limits by the time it gets to city council.
Okay. All right. Still seems a little potentially improper. And there's no guarantee that it's going to be annexed on the 1st. So at least, but we'll have a development proposal on it, which will be helpful in our
Right.
annexation. So,
Right.
okay, we'll roll with that then. Okay, if there's no other questions for Wendy, then we will open it up for the applicant. Okay?
Good evening, Board. My name's Eric Mulcahy with Sand Surveying, 2 Village Loop, Kalispell, and I'm representing the owners of this property who are proposing this project. We've read all 3 staff reports prepared by Wendy, and we're in complete agreement with her findings, and we also agree with all the conditions of approval on the preliminary plat that she's proposed. So we don't have any issues with any of the conditions. I guess I would like to kind of give, kind of a view of what the goal was of this particular subdivision when the developers came to my office to look at it. And so essentially, you know, there's kind of 2 ways to look at a subdivision. You can look at it and try to do something where you can try to make it as compatible as you can with the existing density and subdivisions in the area, or you can try to, you know, add more density to try to create some affordable housing. In this instance, the developers, 2 of which live in Whitefish, the Schillingers, and Doug Siderius, who lives in Kalispell, wanted compatibility with this subdivision. So almost all of the lots, except for the townhomes on the very south end, are 10,000 square feet or greater, which is comparable with the O'Brien Bluffs subdivision. Also, this property is 34 acres in size, and we've got 10.4 acres in park. So almost a third of this is in park and open space, and that's providing a very large buffer, so to speak, on this property. Essentially, a third of it will stay forested, stay in its natural condition, and not be disturbed except for the 2 crossings that we have over the drainage area. In looking at O'Brien Bluffs, which I worked on that subdivision 15 years ago, the density of that project is it's 12.15 acres with 37 lots, so it's 3 units an acre is its gross density. This project with the townhomes is 34 acres with 77 lots, so our density is 2.2 acres, or 2.2 units per acre, so we're less dense. One of the conditions that was added in this plat that we didn't anticipate when we put the design together is the dedication of the 30 feet on our southern boundary. So when we take the 30 feet off of our southern boundary, we will have to redesign all those townhome lots. So essentially, we're going to convert those to single family lots, and we'll be losing 12 units of density with that dedication of the right-of-way. So when we consider the reduction in our density down to 65 units, our overall density is 1.9 units per acre. So we're getting pretty low in our density on this, but I think that adds to the compatibility with the O'Brien Bluffs and also the neighborhood further to the west on Caro. So that was essentially what we were looking to do, and that's kind of was our goals for this whole project. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have at any time during your deliberation.
Any questions for Eric right now? No? Okay, thanks, Eric. Anybody else from your team going to present? No? Okay. Then we'll open up to the general public for comment. So please state your name, come on up to the microphone, state your name and address for the record, please. Yep, just come on up. You don't have to raise your hand, just make a line. Yeah, thank you.
Good evening. My name's John Rutger, and I own 352 Sawtooth Drive. That was the second house built in that subdivision. For transparency, I'm not a full-time resident of Whitefish, but I've owned property in Whitefish for on and off for 30 years. While I do not oppose the Whitetail Ridge development, I think responsible development is fundamental. And I have 2 concerns. One is the road access, and while I realize that when O'Brien Bluffs was developed, they put a road allowance in there, but O'Brien Bluffs has many, many young children. It's not that easy to negotiate, and it's the only subdivision in the city with bioswales for drainage. Some of my neighbors will tell you that they have a competition as to how many cars they pull out of the ditch in the winter. So I think that that's an issue. I think mitigation of this would make Mully Trail into a walking path. There's lots of walkers around our subdivision. We welcome them. I think that's good. But to have a roadway coming through our subdivision out onto O'Brien really doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's a risk to these young children, and we have a lot of them. My second concern is that when I bought the house, it was, one of the attractions was that it was backing onto county land and onto a forest. Over the time I've known Whitefish, there certainly has been an erosion of the forest cover in the city. And I think there was a study done between 92 and 2011 showing there was a 10% reduction in forest cover. And I'm sure that that has significantly reduced since then. That forest behind is very significant as a habitat for wildlife. There are multiple birds, you know, hummingbirds, woodpeckers, everything, deer, occasionally larger predators. But now we've dealt with that with our garbage cans. So that wildlife would really be displaced by this development. And I wondered if an environmental impact assessment has been done or has been contemplated. Under the city's design standards, the provisions for natural environment, and particularly a tree preservation plan, and that's section 12-4-5, section B, exists. And with all due respect to the developers, there is a tendency to beg for forgiveness and rather than ask for permission. And I think you're aware of several episodes that have happened in the city, particularly the one at the town pump where 8 mature trees were felled when it was specifically said they weren't to be. So it's easier to ask for forgiveness. Somebody else, I understand, cut down a lot of trees and was fined $50 a tree. Well, for $1 per year of tree growth, I think that's one hell of a deal. And there's no incentive for anybody to keep trees if they don't want them. I believe that the only way that you can guarantee that the city's design standards are met is by establishing at least a 50-foot buffer between Sawtooth Drive and the Whitetail Ridge development. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Anyone else wish to speak on this matter? Don't be shy.
Paul Van Valkenburg. I live at 344 Sawtooth Drive with my wife and 2 kids. We've lived here in Whitefish for 13 years. I do think it's kind of interesting that when it comes to some of the things on the zoning mismatch and the speed at which we're going, it seems like the tie goes to the developer. We're in the process as a community of reestablishing our growth policy, what we want it to be. We've discussed access on 18th. We've discussed access on Sawtooth. I'm not sure that this exactly fits it. We should weigh it along with a bunch of other things, but I don't know that passing it in the current form with the access and the conditions on 18th is necessarily the best policy moving forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul.
I'm Gabriel Layton, live at 303 O'Brien Avenue, Whitefish, a few blocks away. I don't even live in this neighborhood, but it's cool to see this being done, and it's a neat location. Seems to be close to like fire access. I like a lot of what I'm seeing. The access to the 18th makes sense all day. The Sawtooth access makes 0 sense. I do lawn care, so like you got to be able to like move around. You want neighborhoods, you want roads that make sense. I don't think there would be any need to connect 2 different divisions, period. I mean, even in a standpoint of me, I don't cut anymore, but yeah, I mean, to connect 2 different subdivisions doesn't even make sense. Like, I would just say, even if you could reconfigure and just steer clear of that all the way, just run it on 18th. Don't even connect it to the other ones. They don't even need connected. There's no logical function for that. I think behind Western Building Center, how they run like the 18th, the other division, you can just like loop around on Great Northern like that way, and that makes perfect sense. And to try to shoot for that type of model, I just wouldn't connect the 2 divisions. I would shoot to kind of replicate the same thing that on behind Western Building Center. And I think you guys would do great, and it's cool to see it being built, so I'm just in support of it, and it's nice to see growth happening.
Thanks, Gabriel.
I'm Brett Boeg, 356 Sawtooth, the one in the northeast elbow there with 5 new neighbors attached to it. I think I'll not speak for everybody in our neighborhood, but we've talked a lot about this, and we are all the beneficiaries of growth in the same kind of manner. So we all get it. We all understand that this is probably a good thing, and yeah, it affects us. But at the same time, of course, we'd like to see certain things, knowing that this is a good project, and from our standpoint, from my standpoint specifically, I am one of the people that we have a fun little competition in the winter to see. I mean, I bought a tow strap, never towed anybody with my truck ever, and felt the need to buy one because of the amount of cars that we pull out of the ditch, bioswale in our neighborhood. And just looking at that, if you were to go by our house, you would have to make 5 or 6 90-degree turns just to get to O'Brien. That's not even to get to a main access point into the city. And that is a big concern for myself and several others in our neighborhood, just because we know how people drive through there. There's a lot of traffic when we first moved in 11 years ago. We were kind of right in the middle of the building of all of that. And now traffic has slowed down considerably, and we still have more than 2 handfuls at least a winter where the neighborhoods, you see somebody's headlights in the ditch and everybody kind of just rallies, puts on their snow boots and goes and helps, so that people don't have to call tow trucks, things like that. The Muley Trail access point, it's tough for us as a neighborhood. It feels really inconsiderate to the homeowners to the north to plan on them at some point being willing to do anything like that. And we understand potentially an emergency access road, but something that could be accessed by services, things that are needed in a pinch. Think that could be a potential option, but a street, to even think about driving on 18th Street with 2 cars coming by is a scary thought. And to know that that's the size of that road, and cars driving through our neighborhood in that manner, and then even trying to access it in two directions at one time seems like a recipe for disaster a little bit. We'd love to see a little buffer between both neighborhoods for everyone's standpoint. I don't think anybody wants to look out their back window into somebody else's window, and think that maybe that could be a potential added in somehow. Again, we have no idea what that looks like, but could benefit both neighborhoods significantly in that aspect. So, thank you.
Thanks, Brett. Anyone else?
Bill Courtney, 535 Colorado Avenue. I was going to ask about because looking at the picture, it looks really heavily forested there. And so I was going to ask, are you going to preserve any forestation or just deforest the whole area? And but then after reading further material, I saw that was kind of addressed. So I'll forget that. The one talks about 45% of the trips will travel north on Baker and 35% travel south on Baker. My understanding is in the past growth policies that Spokane was going to be northbound one direction, Baker is going to be southbound the other direction. So how is that going to that's going to conflict with this report on traffic flows? No, you're not going to be able to. If Baker's coming south, that 35% or 45% heading north doesn't going to apply. And on that third report on page 4, staff is recommending 2 notes be placed on the face of the plot regarding development within the WUI. What does that mean? 2 notes applied. It doesn't say what the notes are, and I'm just kind of curious. Anybody know?
Just point of order, we don't, This is not typically a time for back and forth.
Okay.
We'll ask that question, or Richard might come up and answer it for you in just a
Okay.
second, so.
Thank you.
Thanks, Joe.
Hi, my name is Elise Van Valkenburg. I live at 344 Sawtooth Drive with my husband, Paul, who spoke. The access on to Sawtooth Drive is impractical. My own mother is one of the people who drove into the ditch this winter. The road gets icy, and there are so many curves, and so many people end up in the ditch. So to me, that's just impractical. From a scientist standpoint, I'm worried about that wetland, and I'm worried about those mature trees. Mature trees equal habitat for birds and other wildlife. So I worry about the number of trees that are going to be cut down and the constraints that are going to be put on that wetland. Thank you.
Thanks, Elise. Blast
My
from the
name's
past.
Kerry Crittenden.
Hi, Carrie.
I live on West Ninth Street in the county, but not for long from the look of things. But I am, when I look at something like this, there are kind of three big things I look at: stormwater, traffic, and impact. Stormwater, they've addressed that adequately, except I don't understand quite how driveways, sidewalks, and yards will drain. We talking swales or curb and gutter?
I was going to ask that question at the end of our, at the end of
If you go
public
to Old
comment.
Bryan Bluffs, look at those swales, ask anybody there. Nobody likes them. They're problematic as hell. And that might be up to standards, but I beg to differ on that one, okay? So the stormwater is going to follow the swale. Okay. That swale drains clear from Morris Trails to 7th Street. And it runs most years, all year long. There, you can bring water, you can get your feet wet crossing that swale all year. And in big water years, it almost floods Denny Gigno's culvert out. If we increase the stormwater as dramatically as this project will increase it, it might just overtax that swale. We just got to make sure we protect the swale and look at impacts downstream, other properties. If we bump that water up, we need to address that. So the new transportation plan is pretty big on bike paths. We got to protect the swale. Anyway, I see some no-build zones in many of these lots. Why don't we put a bike path along the swale? That would give the city an opportunity to eventually connect that bike path to Baki Park on 7th Street all the way to West 18th. It wouldn't take, these guys wouldn't have to give up that much more footage to do that. Just an idea. Bike paths are, you know, some people that are going to buy these lots don't want a bike path in their backyard. Some people might think it's great if they could access all of the Whitefish Trail system on their bike from their lot. Something we can think about. Downstream, bike path, curbs, traffic. Lund Lane and West 18th have width and elevation issues. There isn't a 60-foot right-of-way on Lund Lane. There isn't a 60-foot right-of-way on West 18th that the city can develop into an actual city street. And try to go up West 18th when there's a little bit of snow on it. Can't be done. So that's got to be addressed. Does the city get stuck with all that? Are these guys just going to help along their subdivision? I think we need to keep in mind that this application will create the need for some major street improvements and maybe pick up some right-of-way. Impact on adjacent properties. I'm the holdout. I'm the 30-foot right-of-way on that north end. The developers approached me, wanted to purchase that right-of-way from me so they could have a full-on 60-foot city street dumping into O'Brien Bluffs. I couldn't do that to my neighbors. It was a lot of money. I couldn't do it. If and when I develop, we'll talk about that, but I have another idea I'd like to suggest. The reason they want that little narrow right-of-way is because that's where all their utilities are gonna hook up. That's where all the sewer will gravity feed to. That's why they want that 30-foot road. But why do they need a road? They can get all their stuff, all their pipes, then plant it back in grass. That right-of-way now functions as a great green space for O'Brien Bluffs. Why not continue that green space, cross the boundary, plant it in grass? I would be open to the discussion of giving you my 30-foot right-of-way if it became public green space and could be, into perpetuity. It'd be a great green space. It'd be a great neighborhood park. They could still have their utilities where and when they want them. Of course, you got to remember, I don't want a street in my backyard. I'd much rather have a park. I would give up that piece of right-of-way potentially. We could discuss that. That's just something I'm throwing out to think about. And I have a couple of reasons for that. Go look at O'Brien where it intersects West 7th. That's a 60-foot road, dumping down to a 30-foot road. That's some of the most problematic and dangerous intersections we have in town, in and around town, have come from that very thing. Don't have enough right-of-way, gonna have a city street, got a big project. Well, we'll just have a city street and then squeeze it down where we need to squeeze it down. That's the kind of intersection where dogs and children get hit by cars. Let's not make another one. Impacts, I'm canvassing O'Brien Bluffs. Nobody wants that road that I've talked to. So I realize it would be problematic for the developers because they would have to reconfigure the end of that street and provide a turnaround or a Y-turn or something right there for people to go down there and go, oh, wait, this doesn't go anywhere. Oh, we can take this little dinky road here and maybe get out into where? O'Brien, where we got to make 5 90s to even get to O'Brien. Impacts on O'Brien Avenue and that convoluted right-of-way issue that's right there at West 13th. I see impacts being pretty dramatic here. And lastly, the fact that there are no endangered species on the map doesn't mean this will not impact wildlife. Come on. I've walked that woods for 40 years. Grizzly bears pass through there. Black bear, there's a sow that's been coming back there for 4 summers and brings her cubs. They stay the summer in that swale and up and on the power line. Birds, eagles nest in there. Owls, woodpeckers. A lot of white-tailed fawns have been dropped back there. Lloyd Quirrell and I, we cut fawns out of that fence for years and years and years. So finally, we decided to just kind of let the fence fall down. And the effects on wildlife are dramatic. And I'm speaking now for those who are the most affected by it and have no voice here tonight, and that's the wildlife. And when we degrade and destroy this habitat, I can't help but think that we degrade and destroy our own habitat. I will grieve for these woods. And I will, and I'll try to be a good neighbor to the people that move in here. And I hope they come to appreciate this community as much as I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Kerry. It's really good to see you.
Hello again, Jamie Gogan, 4500 Two Bear Trail. And I too love the wildlife, and I love the wildlife corridors that we have. And I also found that I love this project, or at least for its location, despite the fact that there will be a level of deforestation. Wildlife corridors are important to me. I think it's why a lot of us love being here and why some people choose to move here. I would love to continue to talk about wildlife corridors and how we understand animals will change their patterns and will move into other corridors that are safe for them to cross and access their habitat. So I do appreciate at least leaving some of those mature trees and the wetland intact. I am an advocate for densification over sprawl, so I like the idea that people can live in this neighborhood and still access the town quite easily. I am a proponent for trails. I would love to see this neighborhood and the Sawtooth neighborhood as well, the O'Brien Bluffs, have access to a bike path. I think that's a lovely idea. And for it to connect as well. With regard to 18th Avenue, I'm not sure what the timeline is on that. I am coming from the north. I live in the county, so Skiles Lake area. This would be such a nice bypass. I already used Caro to access the 93. This would be just a nice way to get to the southern end of Baker Avenue. And so I like that as well, instead of having to go through town. I think a lot of people will utilize this, and I think it would actually reduce the amount of traffic on 2nd Street and Spokane. I humbly request that we consider deeply greater density if we're going to move forward with this project, and the idea of a 30-foot, or I'm not sure how many feet it was, easement on that property. If it's going to reduce the number of homes on that property, I would recommend that we highly reconsider that. The city south of this property has quite a large parcel. Would you consider that you just build a new, move your buildings and widen that street to 60 feet, add sidewalks, do the right thing, make sure that the traffic can hold that type of volume, because again, you're not going to get it just from this neighborhood, you're going to get it from all of those north of Skiles Lake as they want to move through town. So I think it would be a real investment, and I prefer housing over your pole barns, is all I'm saying, with all due respect. And let's see. Okay, I think that was pretty much it. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thanks, Jamie. Anyone else?
My name is Jean Weiscotton. I live at 632 Lund Lane, and my property is catty corner to this development, so I'm adjacent to it. I have had permission from the Quarums to use the property for the last 20 years, and it is incredibly special for being so close to town. I encourage you to go out and walk it and see it and enjoy it before it gets developed. Huge, large trees, lots of nesting birds, deer. Don't tell anybody, I saw a wolf there last week. It's just very special to have so close to town, and I wish we had had the opportunity to save it before Quirum's sold it for a lot of money. It would have been an incredible park. And I do appreciate that they have a lot of green space, but most of that is undevelopable because it's wet. I live there. The ground is saturated most of the year, and I think you need to look very closely at what the water table is there. I think it's like a foot below ground, and I'm not sure that's been addressed with all their surveying and such. There's nesting bald eagles there. There's fox that den and live there, coyotes, pileated woodpeckers, owls. There's so much wildlife there that will be displaced. Many deer and fawns. Caro Ave, there is a death zone for wildlife, and everything is going to be pushed that way. So I would encourage a lower density and some sort of mitigation for nesting trees that are the big dead ones that nobody wants. Those are perfect for wildlife. And there's so many beautiful big trees in there. I just hate to see it clear cut for the timber rather than saving it for the quality of life in the area. I've lived there for 20 years. I have 2 acres right next to it, and it is going to impact me immensely. I'm going to hear it, I'm going to smell it, I'm going to see it. I've lived there a long time, and it really just breaks my heart that this is happening there. So what I would like to see is a lower density. And as far as traffic goes, we all know what it's like on Baker, and especially when the ski area empties out. It's, backed up all the way over the viaduct. And going into town, I don't even go anymore because it's so crowded. And there's so much new development. Everywhere I look, there's townhomes, ticky-tacky everywhere. And we just need to ask, how much is enough? The quality of life in this town has changed dramatically in just the last 5 years. And so I just ask you to take that into consideration when you I know it's going to be approved, but if it could be lower density and lower impact, keep more trees and maybe expand some of the green space. Thank you.
Thanks, Jean. Anyone else?
Hi, guys. My name's Brian Zadie. My wife and I own 625 Lund Lane right next to Jean. She said it so well about the wetlands property. If you can't develop on wetlands and then you take that as a part of what you're providing to the Park Service or not developing, that's one thing. Secondly, I'm not sure whether this development is in North Kalispell or East Bozeman or wherever, but it doesn't seem like Whitefish to us. I mean, tearing down all these trees, developing this stuff up, it kind of changes the whole vibe of that entire southwest area, Whitefish, into, gosh, just another multi-million-dollar property value, houses, et cetera. That's fundamentally different than I think what we're trying to do in the city of Whitefish. Not opposed to development at all, 100%. But gosh, that just looks like Bozeman to me. It doesn't look like Whitefish. And if there's something we can do differently around it, great, let's do it. I understand, you need to develop, build houses, build properties. But gosh, doesn't that just look ugly to you? I mean, just fundamentally. Again, not opposed to it, but gosh, we're on the west side. So the talk about cutting 18th Street right through would actually cut through our property. So there'd have to be something to do. I mean, that east-west corridor, that'd be a different story. Again, not opposed to development, not opposed to developer, not opposed to what they're trying to do. Just, it's hard to take. Just like Jean said, and just like Carrie said, it's a tough thing, tough pill to swallow a little bit. That's all I gotta say. Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone else? Don't be shy. You can line up if you want.
Good evening. My name is Bill Fogarty. My wife and Virginia and I have owned 1235 Caro since the late 80s. We've been long-term residents of Whitefish. I know the city pushed development north towards the mountain for a long time. I understand the fact that you need to start moving south. I'm not opposed to development, but I think the main issues with this are access and especially trying to go through that Sawtooth property. There needs to be more of a loop somehow. And what Gene and other folks have spoken to about the wildlife, that's very important. Doesn't seem to be addressed as well as it should be. That's pretty much, I think the density is a little too much and the access. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Anyone else? Okay. I know you want to get the last word in here, Richard.
Last word. I get another shot at this at City Council. Richard Hildner, 104 5th Street, Whitefish. Let me just kind of go through some findings here quickly. And then the finding number one on the growth policy amendment is not, that last sentence is really not a fact. And I think you should strike it from the, and that's on page 4 of 6. So I would recommend you do the 4, no, on 3 of 6 at the bottom of the page. I would delete that last sentence. Next, the finding number 2, the first sentence, and I don't mean to wordsmith this at all, but I think the whole series, all 3 documents, need some serious editing. There's lots of editing errors, but in this particular case, finding 2, that first sentence is really not a sentence, and it's confusing. And there may be the sentence comments on the lack of housing, but it doesn't say anything about what type or what kind of affordability we are lacking in Whitefish. And I think that could use some clarity. And what is the criteria that quantifies as an extreme, quote, extreme lack of housing? I think that those are the kinds of statements that do not help in our understanding of what the proposal is all about. Finding with number 3 is also one long run-on sentence that mixes 2 issues and dealing with the east-west transportation and incompatible underlying zoning. So I think that is again an editing issue, but also needs clarity if the public is to understand it. There's some conflicts, I think it was in finding 4, refers to the past 3 years, and then immediately refers to the last 2-year time frame. So again, before you move this thing too far forward, edits and clarity are, I think, important. Tree retention, I'm all about tree retention. Town Pump is the perfect example. Once you cut the roots, the trees are going to fall over and die anyway. So I think that the tree retention standards have to be pretty well spelled out. The discussion is, and it's reduced from 77, I think, to 66 now units with that removal. And yet, we talk about all of the need for more housing. Again, the kind of housing. There is nothing affordable here, and we're likely to end up with the same issue we have throughout the rest of the city of Whitefish, where 40% of our housing is vacant on any given day. And now we'll have a subdivision of 66 units that are not affordable and that are vacant 40% of the time. At least that's the possibility. Now the question for you is, how does all of this square with SB 382, SB 323, SB 528, and SB 245, excuse me? They're all in court right now with MAID, M-A-I-D. I'm not sure what happens next. Also, this is governed by an HOA. The HOAs find themselves exempt from some of this legislation. And now we're stuck, or could be stuck, with a development that does not comport well with the decisions of the legislature, and on and on. I also want to talk for a second about the F grade on Baker and 13th. We're already at an LOS, level of service F, and now we're going to put X number of vehicles into that same milieu. So be aware of what happens there. In the staff report, item 15, it's talking, that's when we get into some of the fire criteria. It says A and B roofing materials are permitted. I would submit to you that we should never accept anything less than an A rating on fire roofing materials. We should also include in that same section that bark mulch is prohibited as a landscaping material, and fire-resistant landscaping plants should be required in the subdivision. I was interested to see about the Eagle Rookery that's there, and that the fact that FWP did not comment on that, and I think that that needs to be reviewed as well for their edification. At that, I think there are lots of questions that still need to be answered, and the questions and the answers to them should guide you, I think, this afternoon. And WUI stands for Wildland Urban Interface. All of Whitefish is part of the WUI, and there are rules and regulations that apply to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. Anybody else wish to address? Okay, Joe, quickly, you already had
Joe
one
Courtney,
chance.
535 Colorado. Wendy had said something earlier about it when she was given the original discussion and the mention of Whitefish River, and I'm like, that's not even near the property. Maybe I wasn't clear on what she was talking about.
The whole swale that runs through the property runs all the way along, all the way up through 7th Street down to the river in that area.
So it's heading north up to
It goes north,
okay, that's what
yes.
that other map showed then. Okay, I guess the other thing I would have to say about this being a new community development board, I was on the Board of Adjustments for 8 years, which is now part of you guys, and we were very receptive to comments like I'm making, and any staff that we had, we could address those comments to the staff. They could give us answers. We weren't like the city council, and this is just like, no, you just make your statements and, you know, we can ignore it or maybe discuss it later. So I'm not really happy to see that the new board is running along the same lines as the city council. I would just as soon have, like if I have a question for the city staff or for somebody can answer it. I mean, I did that on the Board of Adjustments. 8 years we did that. It was very open. This seems a little bit more closed to me. Thank you.
Thanks, Joe. Anyone else wish to speak on this?
Board, I'm Doug Siderius. I am one of the developers in this project. We put a lot of thought into this project. The Quorum family is close friends of mine. They approached me about the purchase of this property about 3 or 4 years ago. They approached the city also about trying to do something with the city and donated part of the property to the city years past. And certainly there was a dollar amount that was tied to that, and unfortunately there was no agreement that they were come to. So Floyd and Sandy approached me and said, would you be interested in doing something with this property? Obviously the Siderius family's been in the valley for years, and Al Schillinger is a good friend of mine, and I certainly couldn't do this on my own. Schillinger family's been part of the valley for years and years and years also. So we talked about it amongst ourselves. We went to city planning. We went to Public Works. We talked to multiple people from the city of Whitefish and got their opinion on what we should do before we ever even purchase this property. And so we got some positive ideas from them, what we didn't do, what we shouldn't do. So certainly we put a lot of thought into this. I realize the density certainly could be a lot more. We would be allowed to put a lot more density in this property. We've chosen not to. We've tried to be good neighbors. I approached Kerry and his wife about possibly purchasing, a portion of their property. That was true, and met with them several times and had great conversations. We realize that Sawtooth Avenue is a big problem going into O'Brien. We felt that O'Brien was developed poorly without any sidewalks or curbs or anything else. The project we're proposing is up to city standards, a 60-foot right-of-way with curbs and gutters, proper drainage, all those things. Sawtooth has been a problem from the start. The biggest glitch that we have there is a fire access. That's why we're going out that direction. The fire chief has said he would like to see that happen. Now, we're open to having that closed or a breakaway gate or something like that so traffic doesn't go that way. We don't feel that a lot of people are going to go that way for the same reasons that these people have spoke about tonight. O'Brien is narrow. O'Brien does have some issues because of the way it was built. That's separate from what we're proposing to you tonight. There is going to be some trees taken. Obviously, any development is going to have trees taken. We've tried to alleviate that by leaving 10 acres in the park here and still having a gateway for animals and things to pass through the property. And everyone that's talked here, that is a concern, and we realize that. But also, we have to have some density if we're going to make this feasible for us to have this project also. So I'm asking the board's recommendation. We're certainly willing to work with whoever we can. We've done a lot of groundwork on this before we ever presented it whatsoever. So that's thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Eric, is there anything you want to address from questions that came up in the public comment?
I try to make this brief. Just to address some of the buffering between O'Brien Bluffs and this development, we did try to make our lots deeper, so our lots on that northern property boundary are 147 feet deep, where theirs are about 100 feet deep, so we got almost 50 more feet of depth in our lots to allow for some kind of tree buffer in the backyard between our project and their project. I would echo Doug's point about the connection to O'Brien Bluffs. It was put in, it's always been the policy to connect subdivisions. However, if you as a board or commission or the city council, don't want us to connect it, we don't have to, or we can gate it. We're happy to do that. So, also, I don't think people understand, because it's not shown on this because it's off our property, but the connection to 18th actually is built. So there's a loop that goes all the way back out to Flathead Avenue on this project, and it shows up in our engineering plans that are part of the application. So that's not a dead end to the south. It loops back out to the east. So I think those were some of the issues that were brought up. It will have curb and gutter. It will have drainage. It will have sidewalk. So it won't have bioswales.
Thanks, Eric. I have a quick question for you, if you don't mind. This does not connect to Lund Road, does it? The 18th Street's not going to, there's not going to be a connection to Lund, right?
No, but we will be providing, as condition 11 in the pre-plat states, we're providing 30 feet on our side of the property for a full southern boundary.
Right.
And then City Public Works will be providing 30 feet on their side of the line. So there'll be easement to Lund, but we're not connecting to Lund.
Okay, yeah, but in case there's a future connection, correct? And, well, and to make that
30
part of the
years from
street,
now,
yeah. Okay.
that road could go.
Okay, thanks, Eric. Okay, so we will close the public hearing now, and I have some questions for the board. I'm sure some of you do too, or for the staff. I'm sure some of you do too. So let's go to that. Anybody have questions for staff that want to start?
Yeah, I'm hoping someone on staff can answer. The applicant just said that it's not a dead end where the road appears to go south. It connects back to 18th. Do you have any sort of drawing that could help me see that?
I think it's in your packet. At the very end of the packet, there's engineering plans, and maybe I should have done that drawing instead.
I had it up
I
here.
could try and
There
pull
we
it
go.
up, I guess.
Let's go way down. Here you go. No, that's not it.
So it's also important to note that these are not fully designed engineering plans. The requirements from Public Works to obtain a preliminary plat are basically conceptual level plans. And so as a condition of approval, they will have to improve 18th Street from Baker Avenue to the western extent of this property. And so it's not super clear on the plans because they're trying to cram water, sewer, stormwater, streets, a trail, everything into one map. And so the final plans that will need to be approved by Public Works in order to get final plat will more clearly depict that.
So that just goes to Flathead. This is what we're talking about, this just whole southern border. But 18th doesn't go anywhere. Right now.
It goes to Baker. It
But-
does go
but
all the way
it's
to
not.
Baker, but it's substandard
Yeah.
beyond, to
And
the
it can't
east
be
of this
two
property.
lane.
Well, it's substandard all the way.
Basically a non.
It can be 2 lanes, I do believe. Let's ask Craig that. So, Craig, my understanding, what I asked earlier was that, are they required to improve 18th Street all the way to Baker, or just to the edge of their property?
All the way to Baker.
All the way to Baker. So, but at the end of their property, we only have 30 feet of right-of-way rather than 60 feet.
We have 30 feet of right-of-way that they are dedicating in addition to the city-owned land to the south. So we'll have 60 feet adjacent to this property. However, to the east, we'll only have 30.
Yes, that was my question. So what does that look like? Does it look like the north end of O'Brien before you hit 7th Street?
No, it'll probably be a 24-foot wide road with no curb, gutter, or sidewalk.
Okay, but it'll be 2 ways.
It'll be two-way traffic
lanes.
with gravel shoulders.
So kind of like what Caro looks like now.
Correct.
That's a 24-foot wide roadway, right?
Yep.
Okay. So, and that would be the section from the edge, the eastern edge of their property down the hill to Baker.
Correct.
And they're gonna improve all of that as
Yep.
well. Okay. Does that answer your question?
It does.
Okay,
Thank you.
more questions?
As far as from your perspective, the fire lane that they're wanting to connect to Sawtooth, they're calling it a fire lane at this point. What's your perspective on gating that versus having it open to other traffic from a fire and emergency perspective? Do you have any ideas?
Yeah, you know, the connection to Sawtooth really came up at site review preliminarily on this project and was more of a request from emergency services in order to access the northern portion of this subdivision, should any of the other roads be blocked or, you know, some other emergency exist elsewhere in the subdivision. It doesn't break my heart not to have a two-way traffic, but it's not something I can sit here and recommend without conversing with other city staff. And so I think that's a conversation we could have internally before city council and maybe work with the applicant to come up with another scenario. But I know for sure that police and fire don't like gates.
Yeah, and I have a couple of things too. The subdivision regulations say that dead-end streets are not permitted. Cul-de-sacs are only allowed when there's no opportunity for any sort of extension. All of our subdivision regulations talk about connecting neighborhoods and streets, and then gated subdivisions aren't permitted either. So this was always intended to be connected. I mean, since 2007, we've always intended for this to be connected.
Any other questions for Wendy? Go ahead, John.
In the materials, yeah, it's on.
Yep.
In the materials, it is stated that the trees will not be taken from the lots except for the footprint of the houses and, of course, driveways. So I'm wondering how that's going to work out. We haven't seen the tree preservation plan. I'd be very happy if all trees above 10 inches breast high were preserved. The plan or the condition I think that you attached calls for everything above 4 inches to be preserved.
Right.
I wonder how this is going to work out, because taking this literally, there'd be no front yard, no backyard, because the only trees that'd be removed are in the footprint of the house. Can you comment on that?
So that's, again, straight out of the subdivision regulations. What we don't want to see is the entire thing cleared before anything's built. I mean, we've seen that like north of the McDonald's there, where all the trees were removed for no real good reason. And there was a lot of big trees on that property. So, you know, part of the plan will be that they'll show the extent of the clearing for when the infrastructure is installed. So roads, you know, those rights of way, we're gonna have some clearing for storm ponds, those types of things. But then I would anticipate that they would go out and figure out which trees could be saved, which trees are healthy enough to be saved, and, you know, that will be a plan that we'll have on file. 4 inches is the standard that's in the subdivision regulations. We had an urban forester on our staff a number of years ago, and that was, you know, kind of what she had suggested for us at that time. But you're right, 10 inches is a really nice, healthy tree. And there's some big trees out there, as, you know, folks have said. So, I mean, I think there's some real opportunity to save a bunch of trees out there. Because it's been, like, well thinned. You know, there's not a lot of scrub trees or anything, so. I mean, it could be a note on the face of the plat. It could be part of the HOA covenants. You know, those are kind of some of the different ways that we could address it.
So will that be further delineated between now and the city council hearing?
No, it'll happen as a condition of final plat, because preliminary plat is a two-step process. They come in and they say, well, this is, you know, what we're hoping to do, this is what we'd like to see, and we review it according to the subdivision regulations and the zoning, and then when the council says, yeah, that looks good, that's when the detail work happens. The engineering plans, the details of those. So this is preliminary engineering, what you're seeing here, and as part of the packet, the details will come in, and then that goes back to city council saying, here's how they're addressing all of the concerns.
Wendy, what is our leeway in adding conditions to a preliminary plat?
You can add conditions to the preliminary
Okay.
plan.
And we could we could go above and beyond the subdivision regulations with those conditions, or?
I mean, you need to find that there's, a reason to mitigate something.
Okay. Other questions for Wendy? Toby?
The only thing that came to mind, other than what other members of the board have expressed, the eagle nesting.
This is the first I've heard of that.
Yeah, that should probably be determined, because I think there's federal regulations about those birds.
Yep.
And what can be put, and whether you just plow them down or whatever.
Yeah, there are specific
Well-
federal regulations for both bald eagle and golden
Yeah,
eagles.
no, I know of several. I'm with the Boy Scouts, and there's a eagle nest on their island down on the lake, and we can't even go over in that neighborhood. And there's another one out off of Monaghan Road or
Right.
something. And there's no development there because of those birds. I was just wondering, somebody mentioned the FWP hadn't said anything. I don't want to,
It'll be one of my calls tomorrow.
yeah,
to
I
find
don't
out.
want to burst the balloon of this thing because there's an eagle nest and then have them find out, oh, no, you can't build within X number of 100 yards. But it's something rather than after the fact that should be investigated.
What would trigger an environmental impact study on a place like this? Is that even?
I'm not even familiar with, I guess, that term. There's
Okay.
traffic impact study, but,
Well, yeah, environmental assessment.
right,
John, you
so,
want to answer my question? Go ahead. Make sure you turn your mic
The
on.
eagle's nest. I did a case in the 80s about an eagle's nest. There is the Bald Eagle Protection Act, which is separate and apart from the Endangered Species Act. So I think it's a federal matter, so you'd have to call federal people. Beyond that, I don't know.
Okay, any other questions at this point? Do we have verifiable evidence that there's bald eagle nest out there? Okay. Okay, so it's on the shop lot? Did you know about that, Craig?
I know that there are eagles in the area. I cannot verify whether there is a nest on the city property.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
I have a question. So we've added conditions pretty often about fencing and borders and hedges or how high between neighboring properties. Because this is a forested lot already, I'm wondering if adding a condition that required trees to be preserved that were already there as a fence line, has that ever happened, or would that just get kicked to, that's part of the tree preservation, that comes later down the line, and we'll see what happens? Can we only put a condition to erect something, not to preserve something?
I think you guys have the right to add that condition if you felt like it was necessary. You have to, have a reasoning behind it. You'd have to put some parameters on that, because as someone develops their house, builds a lot, each property obviously with that zoning has a setback requirement anyway. There's a 20-foot setback off the rear where, you can't put a building, but, you could do some kind of condition that within 10 feet of the back property line, that trees should be preserved or something. I don't know. You'd have to discuss that with the other board members.
I mean, what if they're hazardous and diseased and dying and falling down, right?
We do have tree regulations though on lots, right? When you're developing lots, or is that just if you're?
I mean, we have the landscaping chapter, but that does not apply to single-family or duplex.
Okay, all right. Is that a change we made because of the new legislation that came through the state?
You know, we never have a required landscaping for single-family or duplex. We were gonna add duplex, but we have never required it. And
Okay. All right, so I think some sort of condition might be prudent.
I don't know if anyone wants to discuss that with me. I'm not ready to make a motion
Well-
on the beginning of this.
Let's take these motions, I'm not seeing any more questions coming, so let's take these motions one at a time. The first one is WGPA, so that's the growth policy amendment. And the general idea here is, do we agree that we should amend our growth policy to change this from urban or rural residential and planned industrial to urban residential? That would be our first motion, would be to approve WGPA 24-01. Or deny it, approve or deny.
I will make a motion to deny WGPA 2401.
Is there a second?
And that,
Okay, it's moved and seconded. Do you want to speak to your motion?
Yes.
Okay.
Just turned it off. From the beginning, this has been odd, and I know that it often happens that the land is annexed, but us getting this whole package of something that's not in the city seems odd, and changing the growth policy to change the zoning. I know this is only for the growth policy, but I don't see, I understand why this change in the growth policy makes sense, but I don't think that this is timely for this particular parcel because of a lot of the questions, not necessarily with the wetlands. I think that those can be mitigated, but the placement of this, and yeah, I just don't agree that this should all happen in a chain reaction, and the beginning of that is changing the growth policy. So I have to request to deny that.
Okay, you want to speak to your second?
well, and so that ties into my concern about affordable housing. So I may as well go through that now. And I think I can move more quickly if I just read what I wrote. I'm old, I might not connect it all up anyway, so I better read it. So if in the past the planning board has been told it may not consider affordable housing in the context of zoning regulations or subdivision approval, I believe this is not technically correct. In 2021, the state legislature prohibited consideration of certain types of affordable housing. These would be affordable housing for specific income levels or at specific sale prices, citing the statute. Unfortunately, what is prohibited now is just the type of program the city of Whitefish had been pursuing at great effort. The new statute in 2021 does not use the term affordable housing or prohibit consideration of affordable housing generally. The new statute does not prohibit consideration of other types of affordable housing, such as multi-unit buildings with 800 to 1,200 square foot units. The rent on an 800 square foot unit would be considerably less than the rent on a single-family dwelling like those proposed here. Thus, the 800 square foot units would be relatively more affordable housing. The City of Whitefish growth policy states at page 10, we will provide affordable housing so that our teachers, police officers, firefighters, sales and service people, and others whose services we depend on can be, continue to be a part of this community, close quote. I learned at the last meeting that the shortage of affordable housing is 975 units, based on a 2022 community housing study. Affordable housing has been called a crisis. I would agree. The staff report for this project states, quote, businesses are having unprecedented problems with recruiting employees to work in restaurants, retail, government, office, schools, etc. Recent housing surveys and studies indicate the number one problem in recruiting employees is finding housing. As the staff report notes, this project, quote, this project is not providing an affordable housing component, close quote. There is none. So there would be alternatives to provide some affordable housing in this proposal. The issue of affordable housing may be considered in the context of the board's consideration of the zone change application. The zoning regulations require that the board evaluate the project in terms of the general welfare, quote, general welfare of the community. The staff report did make findings on general welfare. What could be more important to the general welfare of the city than to solve the affordable housing crisis? The board's findings could note the facts studied, discussed above, and enter a finding that because this project does not provide for any affordable housing, it is not consistent with the general welfare of the city. Legally, the term general welfare allows for a wide scope of discussion. The issue of affordable housing may also be considered in the context of the board's consideration of the subdivision plat. The subdivision regulations require that the board evaluate the project in terms of, quote, effects on local services, close quote. The staff report includes a discussion of local services, including schools and medical services. Local services of all kinds are dependent on service workers. The growth policy notes the importance of affordable housing for school teachers, firemen, restaurant workers, and other service people. The findings could note the facts discussed above and enter a finding that because the project does not provide any affordable housing for service workers, it has a negative impact on local services. Indeed, the project with now, I think, 65 lots for single-family homes and townhouses will aggravate the affordable housing problem for service workers. If there are 2 people per dwelling, then the project adds about 130 residents. These new residents will require and pay for a host of services, which in turn will require more service workers. Where will these new service workers live? Affordable housing is in crisis now. That means that any aggravation of it is significant. The board could enter findings saying so. The developers propose a growth policy amendment for 65 single-family and townhouse dwellings. In lieu of this, one could propose that community conditions have changed such that the growth policy should be amended to be specific in the kind of affordable housing allowed. So that I will be opposing it on the basis of failure to provide affordable housing, but that does go into the growth policy amendment, which would favor the single-family houses. So that's my basis.
Okay, thanks, John. I think I understand that you have findings. You have findings for denial on on all 3 of the. From what I heard, you have findings on all 3 of these proposals that would.
Yeah, they
that
all
would
link
deny,
together,
yeah.
so it's the same position.
Same positions about affordable housing, but you would take issue with any finding that we'd have to, in order to deny, we need to come up with findings. We need to call out the findings that we disagree with, that we would say are inaccurate in the staff report. So the staff report for the WZTA has 6 findings. We would have to discuss which finding or findings we find that are inaccurate written in the staff report. I think we could do that if that's the direction of the board. Anybody else want to comment on the motion to deny?
Could we get more time to develop findings? That could take a while.
It doesn't have to be super duper formal, but it does, we need to address which finding it is in particular that we would vote against this proposal on. Like which finding is inaccurate that we disagree with. So for example, finding number 2 reads, community conditions have changed that warranting a growth policy map amendment to facilitate residential development because there is an extreme lack of housing in the community. You could potentially say that that is incomplete or inaccurate because it does not account for the fact that this does not have any affordable housing in it. Does that make sense?
Yes?
Okay. But before we go to that, I would like to say a few things about this. On a general level, I don't, looking at this from a high level, which is what we do at this board, and we're in the process of doing that by re-looking at our growth policy and redefining it and rewriting an entire growth policy. For WGPA, for the growth policy amendment, I don't disagree that this should, I don't disagree with the fact that this should actually be, that this should remain rural residential. I think that this should be, this whole piece of property should be designated in our growth policy as urban residential. I do. That is a different issue than the fact that they're not providing any, in the preliminary plat, they're not providing for any affordable housing. To me, that's how I have assessed this, based on what I've heard tonight and what I've read in the packet. So I will be voting against the motion to deny this at this to deny the growth policy amendment. So we're only talking about the growth policy amendment. We're not talking about the whole thing. We're just talking about amending the growth policy to change this from rural residential to urban residential. So I'm going to respectfully vote against your motion. Go ahead, Jen.
Would urban residential include R3 and R4, which do allow for multiple units?
Yes. Yeah, no, R1, R2.
Urban is WLR, WR1, and WR2.
Okay. So duplex, up to duplex.
Up to duplex townhouse.
WR2 is part of the growth policy, or that's their request.
Yes, so their request is to redefine our growth policy, to amend our growth policy for this parcel from rural residential, which has 2.5 acre minimum lot sizes, to urban residential, which would, I think, what is it? I don't know what the size minimum.
Minimum 10,000.
Maximum, yeah.
600 for attached or 6,000 for.
Okay, for a single family, okay. So, moving from a rural residential growth policy designation to an urban growth policy designation. If you would like it to see it denser, that's fine, but this is a more in my opinion, this is a more compatible step with what it borders on the north. On the south is industrial, so but they're not asking to change this to two separate, they're not asking to amend the growth policy in two separate ways, just one way on this property. Any other comments or questions?
I guess I would just add for the two findings that I think I find an error here. Finding 2, I don't think that contributing this amount of housing in this area, this very specific area, warrants a growth policy change. So finding 3, just saying housing, I find that difficult to mesh with the growth policy. And then finding 3, the community benefit of the east-west. This is providing a link, but we're still pretty far away from an actual east-west, and I know that we need those links. But that's also difficult for me in this particular chain of what's happening to say that that makes sense to amend it.
Okay. Any other comments? Scott?
Well, this whole discussion had me kind of thinking about what a growth policy is. And I saw myself, or my successor in interest 20 years from now, trying to interpret the growth policy that we're about to embark on and create. And that finding 4 on page 5 of 6 of the staff report, where it says, the application promotes the goals and policies of the growth policy because it is not in conflict with the growth policy. It supports protecting environmentally sensitive areas, compatible infill development, and an efficient transportation system. Maybe those last 3 words describe something, in my mind, truthful, but certainly none of the rest of that sentence. Right? I mean, if you're changing the growth policy from rural residential to urban, then it's in conflict. I mean, I don't see, I realize that a growth policy is not written in stone. It's not enforceable as a zoning regulation, but it has to mean something. I mean, we're going to go to a lot of trouble trying to come up with the wording, looking at all the maps and everything that we've done to try and look at what the boundaries are for different types of uses. And if those boundaries can be converted with a flip of a switch, it raises the question in my mind, well, what is a growth policy? What good is it? Why are we going to all this trouble in the first place?
Well, I think you raised the same question that the state legislature did in their last session when they wanted the growth policy to be more set in stone and just administered by someone at the municipal level rather than go through this process. I would just offer that there are times when you have to amend the growth policy, and if we look at the extraordinary circumstances of Whitefish over the last 5 years, again, my opinion is that this parcel makes more sense being urban residential than rural residential with 2 completely incompatible, or at least 1 completely incompatible zoning designation, which is heavy industrial, that's underneath there. So, but that would be addressed in the next session. That would be addressed in the next item on the agenda, which is WZC would be changing the underlying zoning.
And I understand the basis of what you're saying. We're talking first about the growth policy, but just from what I heard, you know, this application, the finding is that it supports protecting an environmentally sensitive area and enhances water quality. I mean, those are the kinds of findings that need to be made in order to amend the growth policy to allow for this application to proceed. And I myself didn't hear anything that tells me that it's protecting the environmentally sensitive area or it's enhancing water quality, or that the current application almost by definition has to be in conflict with the growth policy because we have to amend the growth policy. So that finding number 4 just doesn't make any sense to me at all.
Fair enough, fair enough. I would just offer that by looking at this from a residential standpoint then rather than an heavy industrial standpoint, we are, in fact, in some ways protecting water quality, maybe not enhancing it by building in an area that's unbuilt, but by shifting to a residential use, we are, in fact, protecting it from a heavy industrial use but that's beside the point. Any other comments about this? So the motion on the table is to deny. Bree, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Okay. Let's see. Whitney Beckham,
For the motion to deny.
Phil Bolin. Okay. John Heberling,
I'm for the motion to deny.
Toby Scott,
Against.
Scott Worster,
For the motion to deny.
Steve Quinnell.
Against the motion, but the motion does pass on a 1, 2, 3, 4 to 2 margin. So does that, so we still need motions to, it would not make much sense at this point to approve the other two applications without the first one passing, correct? So but do you still need formal motions against to deny those?
Yeah, and can we go through the findings and have
Okay.
the board edit?
Okay, so let's take a minute then and go through the findings that you take issue with and have edits put in there.
So finding number 1 says, an area pertaining to this parcel is identified for both the western portion of the property because it is zoned County R3, which is an urban designation, and the eastern portion because it is zoned County I2, which is a planned industrial designation. I mean,
Do we
you
wanna-
also
do
could
we wanna
just leave it.
alter that motion?
Do you want to alter that finding?
I don't
That
think,
finding, sorry.
I don't have an issue with that finding. That seems like fact to me.
Okay. Finding 2.
Finding 2, I believe, should state, insert affordable housing and affordable in front of housing. So there's an extreme lack of affordable housing in the community.
You would have to say something like, this amendment to the map will not achieve community goals because the overall vision of the growth policy supports providing affordable housing.
Yeah, so both places where it states housing, add the word affordable.
I would also maybe add that this does not provide clear and extraordinary community benefit in achieving these goals.
Okay, can we read it all together one more time? Very slowly, I'm typing as you talk. So this amendment will not achieve, or is that?
Yep, will not achieve community goals in the overall vision because it does not support the growth policy's vision of providing affordable housing. Keep in mind, I voted against the motion. I'm just trying to help make it all work. Is that good enough, Wendy?
So then, are we striking kind of the rest of that?
I would say we might have to strike the rest of it.
Okay.
Unless we want to say, this does not provide clear and extraordinary community benefit.
That's not really the standard.
That's the next.
That's the next paragraph. Okay, we can just strike the rest then.
Do you think?
Is that the only one we're going to change?
I think you could go down ways.
You want to go to finding 4 now? We're going to do anything with finding 3?
Not that I would do.
Finding,
I had put notes down that Whitney had added.
Yeah.
This does not provide the complete connection between Baker Avenue
Okay.
and Caro Avenue, which was identified as a community benefit.
thank you. I was trying to find how to word that for finding 3.
Do you want it to say that the request does not provide a community benefit because it does not connect Caro Avenue to Baker Avenue? I don't think that's a little, that's
Yeah, it's,
pretty narrow.
the finding says eventually connect Caro to Baker, which I understand, but this particular growth policy change does not, this particular project does not connect those.
Okay.
Does not provide a full benefit of east to west transportation.
And then did you want to strike the rest of that paragraph? The incompatible zoning and that,
Yes. John says yes.
I think yes as well, because changing this one does not complete that. It does further that goal, but it doesn't complete east to west from Baker to Caro.
and I heard you say that affordable housing is the community benefit that this request is not.
Sorry, no, not affordable housing. This growth policy change and this project did not fully implement that connection east to west.
But isn't one of the community benefits in achieving a goal would be to provide affordable housing, which you guys have talked about this project does not provide?
Sorry, are we on finding 3 right now?
Yeah, wouldn't that be an additional aspect to finding 3?
I would say yes.
I would say yes.
I think John would say yes too.
Yeah, I was just gonna check the regulations and see if that's at issue. Well, I don't know.
Okay, finding 4. Scott? Go ahead.
So go ahead if you,
I would change finding 4 to read, this application does not promote the goals and policies of the growth policy, period. It does not support protecting environmentally sensitive areas, compatible infill development, and an efficient transportation system. Cross out the middle or the end of that first sentence because it is not in conflict with the growth policy.
Okay.
Did you follow me on that?
Yep.
I think that's,
Do you think that this is not compatible with infill development? I mean, it doesn't provide compatible infill development?
Correct. In other words,
You want to keep that in the finding?
no, I'm saying it does not support protecting environmentally insensitive areas, compatible infill development, and an efficient transportation system.
I would just caution you to take out the compatible infill development part because that's a hard stretch to
Okay,
say that it doesn't support compatible infill development.
all right, well then, delete the compatible infill development words and just have that second sentence be, it does not support protecting environmentally sensitive areas and an efficient transportation system. Got that?
Finding 5.
Is that one okay?
It looks okay to me. I mean, I thought they all looked okay, but, and 6, I think, is probably okay as well. Okay, got enough, Wendy?
Do you want to add, I mean, any other findings?
Do you want to add other findings? Do you want to add a finding that you've, from your speech there?
Those related to findings in the zone change and the subdivision plat.
Well, we're not addressing, we're only addressing the growth policy amendment right now.
No, I mean, ideally, we would put in all those facts that I recited and make some kind of summary of that, but the hour is pretty late. If this is sufficient, I don't.
I think it's, is
I'm
it
new to
sufficient,
this.
Wendy?
Maybe I have one additional suggestion.
Okay.
On page 5 of 6, where it talks about critical areas, goal 1, it seems to me that the application does not preserve and protect a critical area that's environmentally significant in terms of its resource value, and/or defining community image and character of Whitefish. That's one of the goals of the policies of the growth policy, and I would say that.
So we would add that to finding number 4.
I think so. Or as a separate finding, but it makes sense to add it to 4.
Part of finding number 3 as it is.
It's number 4.
Oh, that's in 4?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
That's all I would add.
Okay.
Just note, you only really need one finding that doesn't meet it in order to
Right.
recommend it now.
We don't have to destroy the entire thing. How should we proceed with, Wendy, how should we proceed with the other 2 items on the agenda here?
Well,
The-
you'll need to
the
vote
other
on
2
this one, of
proposals.
course.
What's that?
Did you, you already did vote on this one.
We voted on this one,
Yeah,
yes.
you'll need 2 motions.
2 more motions
and-
to deny?
Yep, and it'll be incompatible with the growth policy will be your finding, and the
Okay.
subdivision will be incompatible with the zoning.
Okay, so let's move on to the second one. This is WZC 24-01. Can I get a motion, please?
I'll make a motion to deny WZC 2401.
I'll second that.
Thank you. It's moved and seconded. You want to speak to it?
Yes, so
Okay.
we will deny this based on the fact that it's now incompatible with the growth policy.
Okay. John, do you want to add anything to your second there?
I would add comma because it does not provide any affordable housing.
Okay. Again,
Well,
oh, go ahead.
that makes it less general. Did you intend to have yours just general violates the growth policy?
No, that's fine. That's fine. You can say whatever you want.
Whitney.
Oh, Whitney. Oh, sorry.
I think you can add that, if we can add that, but are we writing a finding as of now? Before we take a vote on this? Or do we need to vote and then state the finding?
I mean, I think you've said it. So
Oh,
I
it's
just,
fine.
I drafted
just
finding
needs to
number
go in.
1, that the zone change to WR1 and WR2 is incompatible with the growth policy because the zoning district is inconsistent with the future land use map as, I'll take out as amended, and doesn't provide affordable housing. I think it's probably better to keep it general, but.
Yeah, I think general.
Okay.
We just went through all of the findings.
Okay. One thing I just want to say again, I'm going to vote against this motion because again, we're looking at a zone change here, and I can't imagine that anyone in the city wants to see a heavy industrial zone in that area. And right now, it's currently zoned I2. Obviously, we can't change that because we didn't change the growth policy, but I'm still gonna vote against denying this, just because I'm stubborn, I guess. And I do think that WR2 and WR1 is much more compatible zoning for that area. So, Bree, can you give us a quick roll call, please, again?
Okay, Whitney Beckham,
Vote for motion to deny.
Phil Boland. John Heberling,
Vote for a motion to deny.
Scott Worcester,
Vote for a motion to deny.
Toby Scott,
Vote against motion to deny.
Steve Cornell.
I vote against the motion to deny, so that, that motion does pass on a 4-2 vote, which brings us to our last item here, which is WPP 24-01, which is the preliminary plat. Can I get a motion, please?
I move to deny WPP 2401.
I second the motion.
Okay, moved by Beckham, seconded by Heberling.
The reasoning for denying being that this property is not zoned for this type of subdivision.
Okay, John, do you want to add anything? This would be a good place, I think, to add in, potentially add in the fact that there is no affordable housing in this one, but I don't know if we need to do any of that at this point.
You could say effects on local services are negative because residents will need services and the project doesn't apply or doesn't offer any affordable housing for service workers.
Okay? Do you know where to, did you catch that, Wendy? Do you need it?
Like, I guess, which finding are we,
Yeah, we need to know which finding we're talking about here, and I lost my,
Item D.
are you talking about, like, the, effects on local services? Is that what you
It's
said?
Finding 4.
finding 4, effect on local services. Okay. And I can't find this part of the packet.
Finding 1B, effects on wildlife and wildlife habitat. There may be crucial wildlife habitat on this property. Is that clear enough?
Is that a fact?
Okay, and then John is making a case that it violates section D, finding 3D, effect on local services, in that it does not provide housing for the service workers or people who serve our city, such as teachers, firefighters, people who work at the solid waste plant, or people who work in medical services. Finding 2.
Then finding 5, F and G. This project is now not in compliance with the growth policy and zoning. However you'd like to word that.
Okay. So the effects on local services is like water, sewer, schools, streets, police, fire. So you're expanding the
And in-
services to mean
Service workers.
the workers that work on those services? I'm sorry.
That is
Yes,
John's, that is
That's
John's
your-
contention, yes.
Okay.
It just says effects on local services. So we need more local services, so we need more housing for service workers.
Okay. We have a motion. It is seconded. Does anybody want to discuss this any further? I will just say that this was the one where I was torn, and I was leaning against voting for the preliminary plat. We did have 3 separate applications before us. This one is the one where, that I thought was, and this is the one where that I think is best suited for looking at why are we not providing affordable housing for our community in this one, rather than in changing the general higher view. This is right down on the ground view. So I will support this motion tonight. And with that, I think we can do a roll call. We don't need a roll call on this one. Those in favor, raise your hand. Those opposed, like sign. That motion passes unanimously. Okay, thank you for coming tonight. This will still go before City Council for final approval on April 15th, correct? And your zone, or your annexation application will be considered within the context of the development proposal as well, I assume, right, Wendy? Do you want to comment on that, or?
I don't think so. I think it's kind of annexation like you used to see them, where it's just on the consent agenda.
Oh, okay.
That's what I've been told is
Okay.
happening.
All right, so consider that it would just be on the consent agenda, and it wouldn't be part of the public hearing necessarily unless it gets pulled off the consent agenda for discussion at that April 1st meeting. Does that make sense? Eric, do you understand all that stuff? Okay. All right, thank you, gentlemen. All right, that brings us to good and welfare, matters from the board. Any matters from the board? I do have a matter from the board. Is it possible, Dave, when we get our official agenda, is it possible to put a link in there to the actual agenda items? Because I didn't get that until I went to I had to go into the agenda center, and that thing just does not, it's not user-friendly enough for me.
So the PDF of the agenda didn't have the links on it?
Not the one that I had.
Yeah, mine did.
Did it?
Yeah, you just click on it.
Okay, well, maybe I had the old, the one from March 1st did not. The one that I got on March 1st or 2nd did not.
That's the notice.
Okay,
That's just the notice letting you know that these
Okay.
projects are coming, so you don't get cornered in the grocery store. You know, you can direct people to,
A week before.
okay.
yeah, we send that out when we send out the
All right.
public notice, just so
But
you're
yeah.
not caught
Okay.
off guard.
The week
Alright.
before this meeting, when that agenda comes out, it'll all be linked.
Okay, I missed it, sorry. That's my only matter. Any matters from the staff for us? Yes, Craig?
I was just going to mention, I think in the back of our minds, or maybe the forefront of our minds, we need to realize that we're not going to achieve every single goal with every single subdivision. You know, streets and water and sewer are extended one subdivision at a time. And so if we're ever going to accomplish that goal to extend 18th between Spokane and Caro, this goes a long way to doing it. So just want to make that point.
Thanks, Craig. I also echo that. I mean, we do have to be careful about how we look at these things as they come to us. And it's not that we have to approve every development and not have a critical eye towards development. There were a lot of things I would have loved to have changed in this development. I think we could have done that. That would have made it better. But we can't do that now, and you know, they could develop a heavy industrial plant right there potentially, which they probably won't do. But I also think we also need to be considerate of the stories of the people that bring in these that bring in these proposals, because this is not, you know, an out-of-town developer coming in, trying to build things and sell them to the highest bidder, which could potentially happen. This is a local person who has had a long time footprint in this community and has worked really well with the person who sold him the property and the people around this community to try to do the right thing. And it saddens me that that we kind of moved in the direction we did by not even acknowledging that this piece of property should have a different designation on it. Not necessarily that the proposal was perfect, but by not changing the growth policy to accommodate that, we're left with this big this residential rural piece, which is 2.5 acre minimums, right on the border of single-family homes that are 6,000 square feet lots. So it would be a great part of our city. So anyway, sorry, that is me using my bully pulpit as chair to discuss that. Go ahead, John.
Well, very briefly, I think I would have been for it if it had several buildings, maybe 12-unit buildings, 4 of those, and then 50 townhouses. That way you'd keep a lot more trees, I think. Anyway, I think there should be some mixture. Anyway, that's my position.
Yeah, and, yeah, go ahead, Wendy.
I was just gonna say, you know, we can all imagine like different ways to do projects and how we might do something different, but we're charged with reviewing what they bring to us. I mean, it's private property, there are rules, this is what they're proposing. I mean, we can all imagine something super cool in all these different places, but unfortunately, I'm not the queen yet.
Yeah, and it's in the county, and they can cut every single tree down tomorrow if they want to.
Yeah, and the uses are like atrocious.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is
Industrial
that
zone.
I also think if we were just given the growth policy amendment, we might have had a different take on it as well. So, like looking at it just from that really high level.
I will say yes, for myself, that is 100% true, to have all of this package together, knowing that it will be annexed and then this will happen, being the first sort of cog in the wheel. Sometimes I feel like once we start something rolling, it just, you know, and then there's no room to say, this is my recommendation. It just quickly happens that we say, approve, approve, approve. And then our voices don't even get passed to city council because we don't say it loud enough, if that makes sense.
We've also, like, when just a growth policy comes or just a zone change, we hear from you and council, but what are they gonna do? So, I mean, you always wanna know, what are they gonna do? So that's why I think they proposed to bring it all, so it's not a surprise.
I know.
What are they gonna do? Are they gonna do a PUD and do multifamily, and then the neighbors will be upset, you know, so it was full disclosure.
Yep, I mean, over and over and over, the planning board and the council, they always want to know what the project is. And so we tell developers, you should be probably better off bringing it all at once, so they can see the whole thing and what you're proposing. And if you have specific issues with the plat, which it sounded like, then you can deny the plat or have them make changes or put conditions on it to get those things. But looking at the big picture of the growth policy, I mean, when we do our growth policy update, I can guarantee you we're going to change that to urban and get rid of that industrial zoning. So, I mean, it's just one of those things
I
that,
fully expect that when we do the growth policy
but that's
update.
2 years or
Yeah,
3 years away, right?
Exactly, that's a ways.
Well, the city council might have a different take on this, just so you guys know. And that's okay. It's okay. We're doing our jobs. Thank you all for doing your jobs tonight and really digging in and considering all of this stuff. This is not easy work that we do, and, you know, this is all in addition to our day jobs. When is our next planning board meeting scheduled? It is what, the 17th of April?
April 15th, I think. I don't have my, it
Is that Monday?
says it on the bottom of the agenda.
18th, okay. I will be out of town on the 18th. Anybody else not going to be here on the 18th? Okay, that's 2. That's 3.
I'll be here.
I'll be here.
1, 2. Scott?
April 18th?
Yep.
Yep.
Well, I have a surgical procedure earlier in the day. It's kind of depends on how that goes.
Is there a way, how much time do we have to move it a day? I could do Wednesday that week, but not Thursday. I'm leaving Thursday morning.
Well, we have a consultant that's lined up to give an hour-long presentation at the beginning of that for our whole economic development study that they're working on. Well, when we can, if we need to change it, we're gonna have to let them know too, so.
Yeah.
And one of the items is, it's gonna be your first variance request, and variances do require 4 votes in the affirmative regardless of how many people are here.
I can email tomorrow, yay or nay, that I'll be here. I can confirm.
How much time do we have time to change the date for the April meeting right now?
Yeah, I think the ad goes out next week.
Yeah, we have at least a week, so if you can, what we need to know.
I will definitely not be here on Thursday.
Is there a way to extend it to the next week?
I mean, I guess it just pushes everything else back. I mean, potentially, I think Alan had some visioning meetings scheduled.
Yeah, the following Thursday we do, yeah.
Is it the 25th at his meeting, or is that?
Yeah, that's when the following week would be.
Yeah, the 25th at Grouse Mountain.
Yeah. I would see it just,
Maybe
about the 17th.
April 17th?
Is that any better?
I'll be gone.
That's a Wednesday. I can make Wednesday, the 17th.
The day before.
Okay. So,
I'm in the Bay Area that day.
That eliminates the uncertainty associated with mine.
okay.
Okay.
You're okay on the 17th?
Yes.
And who knows about Middleton?
So Scott, for sure you'll exist on the 17th.
Oh, there it is.
But I'll try.
What about the Tuesday, the 16th? You're out of town the whole week. Okay. Does that make it any better for you?
What's wrong with the 17th? That
We
Wednesday?
have 5.
Nothing?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if we have 5, that's great. We have 4 for sure. Maybe, hopefully John will be available on the 17th. Is that going to be okay to move it to a Wednesday? What if, well, I mean, if the consultant can't make it, then I'm not sure.
They were gonna participate via Zoom anyway, they were gonna be here in person.
Oh,
Oh,
okay.
that's good.
All right.
Be anywhere.
We'll look at it and get back with you.
Okay.
Pronto, though.
Yeah. And that wouldn't mess up the variance request, because they're assuming that they're going to be on the 17th or the 18th? Is that,
Yeah, I mean,
you'll just tell them that?
yeah, and there's another
The
applicant
applicant.
too. There's 2 things on
2
that night.
things? Okay.
Yeah.
All right, and that meeting will start at 5, so
Yeah.
if you could send that reminder as well.
Starts at 5.
Yeah, because there's a,
Workshops.
yeah, we have a workshop that night.
Is a variance the same thing as a conditional use permit?
No.
It's different.
Yeah, variance is a variance from the planning and zoning regulations that we have the final say on.
Okay.
So whatever we vote is final unless somebody appeals it. But, so,
Is that a Board of Adjustment function?
yes, it's an old Board of Adjustment function. Okay, anything else? Okay, just need a motion to adjourn,
Make a motion to adjourn.
and we are adjourned.
Second it, Mayor Lindsay.